started by classifying diseases in various ways. First of those ways was by what kind of pathogen. And so the kinds of pathogens that exist are bacteria, viruses, protists, fungi, and prions. We also classify them by how they spread, routes of transmission. So body fluid, which we call bloodborne, cough and sneeze droplets, which we call airborne, animals, which we call vector-borne, the animals that spread diseases we call vectors, and food and water-borne. And then there's that direct or indirect contact thing. Finally, we classify them by how they are affecting a population. Endemic is an adjective that means occurring at a steady rate, about the same number of cases this year as last. Emerging means we've never seen it before and it's coming into the population. Re-emerging means we thought we got rid of it, but it's coming back. And epidemic and pandemic, basically two different scale versions of us not having control of a disease. Any questions about that? Because smallpox is a disease that has not reemerged, but has the potential to. Basically, it's one that we eradicated, but that countries still keep cold storage samples of, that if they got out, we almost certainly would not have any resistance to it. Yep. All right, moving on, let's look a little bit at viruses. We've sort of scratched the surface of viruses before. Let's kind of go into how they really work. The virus we use to teach viruses is the simplest virus we know. It's the kind of virus that infects and kills bacteria. The kind that, for example, CRISPR was a natural immune system against. Remember, CRISPR was taken from bacteria and it was like their immune system against viruses. That's the kind of virus we're talking about here. They're very simple viruses. They kind of look like little alien landing pods. And a bacteriophage is a structure that has really just three parts to it. Number one, it has nucleic acid inside. That's DNA or RNA. Number two, it's got a capsid, which is sort of a coat made of protein. So really simple thing, a thing that kind of exists outside the 8 characteristics that all living things share. It's one of those things that some scientists actually disagree on whether to consider viruses living things or not, because they're not made of cells. And that's one of our kind of the defining characteristics. But they do have DNA, which what non-living thing can you think of that has DNA and uses it? So here's how they work. Basically, they need a living cell to do what they do. That's another argument for maybe they're not classic living things. The basic infection cycle looks like this. And you're going to make 4 drawings. So if you're like at the bottom of a page right now, I'd start a new one. Starts by every virus has a particular kind of cell it's looking for. In this case, it's a bacterial cell. The virus finds that bacterial cell, the attachment legs glom onto it, and it ejects its DNA. I'm just saving space by writing over top of my diagrams. For you, I would say right underneath the diagram. But you do you. Step 2, well, the capsid part, the protein coat is done. It's done its job, which is to deliver that DNA in there. That's all it was for, so it falls off. So then the question is, what was that DNA actually a code for? And that viral DNA that got injected and is now in the bacterial cell turns out to be a code for more virus parts. And the problem with this DNA is the same as the magical thing about DNA, which is that code is code, right? The bacterial cell isn't going to go, well, this is the wrong code. Like, it just reads it and does what it says. And what it says is to make a whole bunch of new capsids and attachment legs and DNA and RNA. And eventually, it makes enough, and there's a signal, and the cell, the host cell, we call it, busts open, spewing new viruses, fully assembled, everywhere. And like, I know it's a lot of parts that I drew, but think millions, because that's how many viruses spew out of a single cell. Hundreds of thousands to millions. That's pretty diabolical when you think about it. What this thing has done is just basically thrown some code into a cell. Threw some code into a cell, and then the cell did all the work for it. The cell used all the energy, used all its own parts and all its own materials, and used them to build more viruses. And then self-destructed the cell to spew millions more viruses out into the world. It's like if somebody, let's see if I can come up with a halfway decent analogy. It's like if another country sent us a computer virus that took over every plane and tank and war factory in the country, made them build a bunch of weapons, and then made them leave the country and go invade a bunch of other countries in the same way. It's not doing any of the work itself. It's amazing. And that's the simplest virus. Talk about viruses that infect more complicated living things like you, and you throw in a whole bunch of different wrinkles. But that's the basic idea. Questions?
Like a virus like this, and what is fast like us humans?
Correct. It turns out that viruses are pretty specific to their hosts. And they're pretty specific to the kinds of cells they like to infect. Like, for example, the common cold is what we call a rhinovirus that only likes the cells in your mucous membranes in your nose, right? That's all it likes to do this thing to.
So, like a cold on your nose, does it get to like your sore throat and all this because it's all connected?
Yep, and because it's basically the same kind of stuff, right? It hits the nose first generally and replicates in there. And then it can spread out to the eustachian tube and the throat and the lungs and that stuff. But it's specific to mucous membranes. Yeah, because that's where you're touching your environment. Yeah. Yep.
Is that what gives you like stuffy noses?
So the overproduction of mucus is sort of your cell's overreaction to that virus being. Yep. Good questions. And our next thing after viruses and bacteria will be how the immune system works. So that's where we're going. I have a question. Yes. So I had this movie. Yeah. The movie. Yeah, so I have a movie. It's about a disease called Ebola. We don't have to watch the movie. So it's a documentary. It's pretty old. It's like 1995. But like they had cameras, like Nova, the PBS show, had cameras in a city in Zaire in Africa where one of the first big Ebola outbreaks happened. So it's real. And Ebola is this disease that basically hits you, and then eventually, if you have the worst kind, it liquefies your insides and you bleed out. Now, you don't see that at all in this movie. And I have a passage from a book about Ebola that I usually have kids read that's pretty graphic. I think we're going to skip that this year, just because it's this year. Okay? But I'm wondering if you guys want to see the movie. Yeah. Now I'll just tell you, you will see people who have died from Ebola, but like not graphically. Like you'll see them maybe in sheets or, being carried out of a place or whatever. I mean, it's kind of a scary movie, but like, I don't know. Usually it's the book that makes like every once in a while someone will get gray and keel over because the book is so scary, but not usually the movie. So I'm going to leave it up to you. Hands free, you want to watch it?
It's okay, we have to go to driving school.
Oh, did they show you those movies?
Yeah.
I'm so glad they still do that. That's hilarious. I thought I didn't think they were allowed to do that anymore. Ah, it's amazing. Yeah, like people who have gone through windshields and like, and it looks like, like some of it was maybe kind of fake, it looked like ketchup, but then maybe it wasn't. I don't know. Yeah, that's a vivid memory from like my 16-year-old.
Yeah.
So,
Can we still read the book?
if you really want to, yes.
I
Yeah,
really want to.
but Mrs. Valentine will get mad at me if I make you read that book this year. I always warn her, and then we read it, and then there's usually one person who's just like, and like sit down against the wall. It's not the year. It's not the year.
I've seen it.
Anyway, at some point we will watch that movie about Ebola then. Because what you asked, Riley, about can a virus just attack any cell? What's interesting is typically the answer is no. Typically they're real specific. Some of the scary ones, though, are the ones that kind of don't care what kind of cell they infect, and that's what Ebola is.
Like, kind of, but like, left going
COVID is basically a novel virus, which means it's got a whole bunch of DNA that our species had never seen before. And that's kind of why it's able to do what it does. We'll talk more about COVID, I promise. But I think that's probably good for today. Make sure that guided reading due today is done. And yeah, I'm going to give you something. I'm going to give you an activity that is due Thursday. We'll talk about it. This is end of course exam review stuff. I told you no packets. There's basically 2 pieces of paper you need to do. This one's due Thursday. But it is just kind of simple fill in the blank or matching kind of. But it's challenging, so give it some time. It's due Thursday. We will look at the practice tests that you took. We'll look at those tomorrow and Wednesday on our shortened little periods. Everybody knows what's going on tomorrow and Wednesday, right? English test, 2-hour delay. Rooms that you're going to are posted on the library windows. Okay?